All right, let's say you have an alarm ringing, or you're inside, you have a remote annunciator and that's ringing. We're going to cause a fault, and I'm going to show you how to reset these faults. First thing, if you want to silence the alarm, hit the silence button. That'll silence the alarm, but the alarm's still lit that the emergency stop's been pressed in, or you could have a malfunctioning e-stop also. In order to reset that fault, you would come out, check, and make sure all the e-stops are pulled out. You turn them clockwise and let it spring out to you. You hit the reset button, hit stop. You're going to get another alarm that you're not in auto. Silence that. And it's going to ask you, do you want to reset all the faults? You hit OK, and it'll tell you what faults have been reset and what haven't been reset. Emergency shutdown is now inactive. Generator not in auto is still present. Put it back to auto, hit acknowledge. All the lights should go out on the panel. The only two lights you're going to have lit are the green light for the communications and the green light for being in auto. If you have any other lights lit, there's still an issue going on. Now, any emergency stop that happens, whether it be from the e-stop, high coolant temperature, low oil pressure, low coolant temperature, or an engine fault, is going to trip the breakers on the other side. Okay. So the last thing you want to do before you leave, make sure everything's okay over here, and then walk over to the other side and reset the breakers. I have a 300 amp breaker and a 600 amp breaker. Each go to the transfer switch downstairs. Each transfer switch has its own breaker dedicated to it. When you have the emergency stop like we had earlier that we reset, the final stage was to reset the breakers. You're going to have to pull the breaker down and push it back up. And if it's not reset, it's not going to let you reset the breaker if the fault is not reset. That's the last thing you do after you reset a fault. Make sure the breakers are shut. You have an annunciator here, which is going to give you your emergency stop, over crank, high coolant temperature, low coolant temperature, over speed, low oil pressure, pre-low oil pressure, low battery voltage, high battery voltage, low coolant level, low fuel level, high fuel level, and the remote e-stop, which is in the building. The remote e-stop light will light up when that button's pushed in. It'll still enunciate e-stop up here, but this light will light up for that separate e-stop. In order to check the lights on the panel, push the check light, and it's going to make sure that they're all working. I've never seen these fail. They're LEDs, they last forever, and they're hardly ever lit. But if you want to, every once in a while, just come out and make sure the lights are working. You have amber and green on this side. You have red on this side. The red, generator's down. The amber, there's a problem, you better look at it, but it's still gonna run. The green is just an indication like you have engine running. So it's just gonna let you know that the engine's running. But basically when the engine's stopped, none of these lights should be lit, only the green light. Yep. Up top, with the LEDs up here, this one's an amber one, that's just a warning. This one's a red one, that means you're dead. It's not gonna run. Or it might run, it's not gonna produce any power. The reason they have two separate ones, not all on here, is there's a lot of electronics on the engine, so when you get a fault in the engine, it just shows up as an alarm up here. It doesn't give you the list on the remote panel, but it does log it in the computer. So if you want to view that, you hit the event log, and if you had a fault, it has genset control and engine control. It will list the number next to it, that there's 1 active, 2 active, or 3 active. You would push the OK button, and the most recent fault's going to be the top one. Like right now, it says Gen not in auto. That's just logged from when we just did it. So that's telling you what the problem is, whether it's engine, e-stop, or high coolant, low coolant. Whatever's active is going to say active underneath of that fault. If you hit the OK button again, that gives you a code number. So if you're going to call us for an emergency call, or if you have your other service, If you give them the number and they have to call us out, when you give us that number, it gives us an area where there's a problem. So we can make sure that we might have the right parts on the truck to fix it the first time instead of traveling back and forth, between the job. So it's an SPN code and an FMI code. You would write those down, and when you call in the emergency call, give them those codes. Now, if you hit the arrow down, that's your timestamp on when the last time it happened. The last time it happened was at 41 hours, the 23rd of October at 22:37. And that's a good thing if you have a fault where you come in from the weekend and you think somebody might have been screwing around, they hit the e-stop in, you could always go back and see when that happened. And that does that for every fault. And it gives you the first time it happened and the last time. So you could actually see the first time it ever happened on the machine and the last time. The only way that can be cleared out is by us on the computer, and we would clear the whole record out. But it will list 266 of each event. Not a total of all the events, 266 of not in autos, 266 of, over temperature, under temperature. Right. Once it gets to 266, bottom one's dropped off, and they just keep compiling on top of the other one. When the engine's running and you want to view AC, just push the AC button. The first page is like an overview. It gives you your average line-to-line voltage, average line to neutral voltage, and your amperage. And it will also give you your frequency. If you hit the arrow down, that'll give line-to-line actual A, B, and C on your voltage and your amperage line-to-line. Go down again, that's your line to neutral. That'll do the same thing, amperage and voltage on those three phases. The next page will tell you how many kW is on each phase, how many kVAR, and how many kVA is on each phase. Scroll down to the next page, that's going to give you your power factor. I don't think you'll have a problem here. Most of the resistive loads on here, so it shouldn't be bad. But if you were like in a factory or something, you had a lot of motor loads on it, and the utility's charging you more money because they said you have a poor power factor, you could actually run it on the generator and see what it actually is. To fight with them and tell them, yeah, we got a better one than what you're saying. The next page will give you a percentage of it, percentage of the total package. So if it's 400 and you're 50%, you're running 200. You know you have another 50% to go. The next page is basically your watt meter, just like you have at your house. And what that page is for, if you have to report to the EPA once a month how many hours on the unit, sometimes they'll ask you what the kilowatt hours are. So it's more for documenting records. Next page will give your average line voltage, line to line, line to neutral, your power factor, whether it's leading or lagging. The last page tells you what the generator voltage is rated at and what the generator kW is rated at. So basically 480, 60 hertz, 250 kW, and 313 kVA. So if you didn't know what the generator was, you could scroll down to the bottom. Correct. When you get down to the last page, it's just going to show you an arrow pointing up, no more. Right? And then you would just arrow back up. Now if it's running, you have the engine button. That's all your engine parameters. You have oil pressure, your coolant temperature, engine RPM, and how many hours are on the unit on the first page. On the second page is basically the same thing, except it's actually spelled out. Some people don't know what an oil, the abbreviations are, so they want it spelled out. So that's what the second page is. The third page will give you your battery voltage and your engine hours. The fourth page is a service interval. That runs on time or hours. Basically, you're supposed to change oil at 500 hours. You'll never put 500 hours on, so it's on a time period. And it's set to a year, 365. We turn that function off because a lot of people don't change their oil once a year, although we recommend it. CAT says you could go 3 years without an oil change as long as you get live oil samples taken and send it to a lab and have the records of it. So that alarm's turned off because we get a lot of alarms coming in and you're calling for an emergency call for a stupid service alarm. The only time we turn them on is like prime power units that are running 24 hours a day. Your next page, that'll give you your total, how many times this thing went through a crank cycle and how many times it actually started. There's always a difference between the two because first off in the factory, they check it to make sure it goes through a crank cycle before it fires up. We put it through a crank cycle to make sure we get the alarm as if it didn't start for an overcrank. And anytime you change your fuel filters on this thing, you're probably gonna have to go through a couple of crank cycles just to prime it. It'll crank for 30 seconds, stop for 15, crank for another 30, stop for 15, crank for 30, and then it goes into a fault. The next page is telling you your intake manifold temperature. That's the air going into the engine, and it'll tell you your fuel temperature. If your fuel temperature gets above 160 degrees, the engine's automatically going to derate itself. You have a 1,400 gallon tank, you're not going to have an issue with it overheat. Plus it also has a fuel cooler on it too, so you really shouldn't have a problem. The only time you would see a problem is if you get low on fuel and the radiator's clogged up. Then you're going to run high fuel tank. The next page tells you your fuel pressure and your boost pressure. The fuel pressure on this runs between 70 and 120 pounds on the low pressure side. If you're down around 50, 60 pounds, you probably got a clogged fuel filter. You might want to think about changing it. The boost pressure is just the amount that the turbo's building up for pressure. With the load that I see in the building, you're never even going to spin that turbo. It's never going to get even spooled up. But if you had a power issue, this is where we would look to see what kind of pressure is in the system. Now this is a good page. This page tells you how much fuel that this has burnt since it was made. And it keeps tallying on every time you run it. And it also gives you your live rate. So when this is running, it'll tell you how many gallons per hour you're burning. So say you had 2 weeks that you're running because it's a pretty big tank, and you want to know when the fuel guy's got to come. If you know you're burning 10 gallons an hour, you only got half a tank, he could come next week, you know, but this way you could schedule the fuel guy to come out and refill the tank. Right now it's burning 0 because it's not running.
But if it was running, it
would give you a number right there. And that's the end of that. This main menu, stay away from it. The only thing you really want to see is faults, and that's this quick button up here. The main menu you could actually get into and change a parameter. Not that you're going to stop the generator from starting, but you could cause a performance issue. In order to run it manually, just push run. Right now, we're burning 1.8 gallons. That's just in case the transfer switch doesn't start it, there's a break in the wire somewhere, you can come out here and push run. I tell people when they're stopping it, if you're manually running it out here, so you don't forget to put it back in auto, just push auto right away. It's going to shut it down unless the transfer switch is asking for it. The only reason you'd use a stop button is to lock it out if you're working on it. So go run to auto. All the cool down timers are done by the transfer switch, not out here. So as soon as you put it to auto, it'll shut down and it'll be ready to go. There's an operation and maintenance manual in here, and the warranty papers are inside. There also is a connection for Ethernet. If you guys decide that you want to put this on your building monitoring system or something, there's an Ethernet connection on there. So that's this side. You have battery charger here. Charger's deep in there. Same as with the control panel. Green lights are good. Red lights are bad. You will see an amber light up when it goes into boost mode.
Okay.
Which will happen, it periodically checks the batteries and sees if it needs to actually activate it. They say maintenance free. They're not. Caterpillar doesn't sell a generator with maintenance-free batteries in it. They have issues with maintenance-free batteries boiling over because it's always trickle charging. And we had a lot of battery failures because nobody can check them. If you do have to add to them, only add distilled water. Never add battery acid back to the battery. Like I said, They say maintenance free, but if they have removable lids like this has on it, it's not maintenance free. You have 2 fuel filters. One's a fuel water separator. If you get a bad batch of fuel, you'll see the water in this separator. There's a little drain valve on the bottom. Just unscrew it, drain it into a bucket until you see no water and you see fuel in there, shut it. That's the only time I'm going to tell you to run the generator no low for 15 minutes to make sure you purge all the air out of the system. You have your primary fuel filter. When you change these fuel filters, never, ever, ever fill them up before you put them on. We were talking about that 40,000 pounds of fuel pressure. One little piece of dirt and this fuel system will blow the tip right off the injector. So you just unscrew them, put a little grease or oil on the seal, screw it back up in there, both of them dry. Then you have a hand primer pump here. Unscrew it and pump a lot. And it's going to take a lot. And you'll feel it when it starts to fill, and you'll actually see it fill up the bowl. That's when you're going to have to go over, pump it till it gets hard, go over, make sure you screw it back in because the pressure is going to pop that back out. Screw it back in, put it to run, let it go through 3 crank cycles. If it doesn't start, put it in stop, come back over and pump it again. This is the engine computer. Really don't need to know anything about that, but other than it's a computer and it's there. Now this is the pump I was telling you about. This pump takes this 90 pounds that's here and builds it up to 40,000 pounds. Anything from here up, you don't want to crack any lines. You have your crankcase vent. That runs up to the front of the radiator, and as the radiator is blowing, it blows that nasty air out with it. Fan belts, hoses, and batteries. 3 years. Whether they look good, they test good, everything's plastic and rubber. They're going to dry rot, you can't see if they're bad. We tell you just change it. If you want an emergency generator, you got to make sure it's ready at all times. Especially with the hoses and the belts. The batteries, they can test good. You can have a broken terminal inside, and just as you start the engine, it goes away from it. Now it's not any good. Right. So we tell you in 3 years, even if you got a 5-year battery, because it's constantly being charged up, just throw them out. If you want it to be reliable. I'm gonna go around. Everything's pretty much hot in here, very hot. This is the turbo line that comes off of the turbo. And if you actually had some building load, this would get up to be about 400 degrees. It runs through a cooler in front of the radiator and cools it down to 100 degrees to go into the engine. So this charged air system, this black line here, will get up to 400 degrees. So you don't want to be putting your hand in here. And I also recommend if you are running on the building, that you're not out here just opening doors and peeking in. Because like we talked about earlier, somebody put this together, they could have a bad day and forgot to tighten something up, and that's coming flying out at you. So if it is running, I would just recommend open up the control panel door, and you could kind of see down in there and see on the sides. And if you are going to come over here, just open up the door and take a peek. Because when it flies apart, it doesn't stop, it just shrapnel. Okay, so this is hot. Your exhaust pipe is hot. It comes off the turbo, that runs in the front. The muffler is in this compartment here, it's not exposed. And all the air blows out the top of the enclosure. The exhaust and the hot air from the radiator all go out the top. Your dipstick tube, just like a car. Just make it sure it's between the lines.
Yep.
Between the lines, you're good. You don't want to be overfilled with it.
Right.
The crankshaft will sling it around, and you'll be going out the exhaust just like if you're on a no load. This is your port. They sell a kit.
Yeah.
You plug in, it shoots it in a bottle, put a label on it and send it to us. The coolant sample one is right above it. That's that green one. Same thing. Same bottle. Plug in the line. The air cleaner, which is right there. There's various ones you can get. This one has a paper filter on it. They sell one that's a composite filter that'll last forever. This one we say, just like the belts, because it'll dry rot. 3 years, put a new one on.